Penguin Random House Audio presents The Determined Spy, The Turbulent Life and Times of CIA Pioneer Frank Wisner, by Douglas Waller, read for you by Robert Fass. To Judy. Prologue. It was a sunny, warm Friday evening on September 12, 1958, when the Wisners' oldest son, Frank George Wisner II, walked out of the family's Locust Hill farmhouse near Galena, Maryland, on the eastern shore, just in time to see his father slip quietly into the back seat of a sedan. His father, Frank Gardner Wisner, did not look back at his 20-year-old son, who was confused, upset, and emotionally exhausted by the mental disease his father suffered. Aunt Elizabeth, his father's older sister, who had rushed to the farm to help the family deal with the crisis, sat next to Wisner in the back seat. Down-to-earth, deeply devout, simple in her habits, and focused on charitable works such as the Red Cross, Elizabeth could always calm her brother when she was with him. Frank thought his sister was essential in his life, and Elizabeth could clearly see now that her brother desperately needed medical help. The psychiatrist behind the wheel started the engine. Another psychiatrist sat in the front seat, leaning around to talk to Wisner. The car sped down the dusty dirt lane that snaked away from the farm and headed to the Shepherd and Enoch Pratt Hospital, a little more than 80 miles away near Baltimore. Wisner's wife, Polly, walked up to her son as the car drove away and told him that his father was being taken to a mental institution. Three close friends, business partner John Graham, White House National Security Advisor Gordon Gray, and Desmond Fitzgerald, who ran Asia operations for Wisner at the CIA, had spent much of the morning with Polly and Elizabeth, convincing Wisner that he needed to go with the psychiatrists to Shepherd Pratt. Henry Sears, who owned a nearby farm and had partnered with Wisner in land ventures, had stopped by earlier and made the same pitch. "Frank, you simply have to do this," Sears told him. Frankie, that was the nickname that mother and father had given their oldest son, said nothing. He walked back into the farmhouse, where he collapsed into an upstairs bed and slept for most of the next 48 hours. Home that summer from college, he was wiped out from taking care of his dad, who for more than a month had been drinking heavily and roaming the farmhouse at night, unable to sleep. Frankie worshipped his father. It was agonizing for him to witness the alcohol abuse, the hyperactivity, the sleep deprivation, all flashing lights for the mood disorder tormenting Wisner. Polly followed her son back into the farmhouse. Her husband's nervous breakdown had been torturous for her. When he was like this, Wisner could be rough with people, particularly with Polly, whom he thought too controlling when he was in his agitated state. Mental illness took a toll on marriages. Polly and Frank had been deeply in love, and Polly had been totally devoted to her husband and his career in Washington. Yet what affection there had been between the couple was dissipating by fall 1958. Still, they stayed together. Though not a woman to complain openly, Polly was deeply embarrassed by her husband's aberrant behavior. She did not want his reputation, indeed the entire family's reputation, indelibly stained by this. Hoping he somehow would just snap out of it, Polly told many friends only that Frank was going to the hospital for a complete rest. Frank Gardner Wisner was one of Washington's most powerful men, though few in the city had the security clearance to know it. He led the Central Intelligence Agency's clandestine service, whose thousands of committed spies and saboteurs conducted covert operations all over the world. Wisner had pioneered the United States government's entry into secret political warfare, with a mission to fight the Soviets using the same covert tools, such as espionage, guerrilla attacks, and propaganda, that the Russians employed. He had organized infiltration and psychological operations against the Soviet Union and its satellite countries in East Europe, had overseen coups in Iran and Guatemala, and had been privy to America's deepest and darkest secrets. And now he was on his way to an insane asylum. Memos that Wisner was entering a mental facility raced through Washington. James Angleton, the CIA's top counterintelligence officer, told the Federal Bureau of Investigation that Wisner had suffered a complete nervous breakdown. Fitzgerald notified Gordon Gray. President Eisenhower's national security aide alerted others in the White House. The CIA prepared cover stories to keep other government agencies in the dark as much as possible about Wisner's condition. But harsh gossip spread quickly in Washington and abroad. Frank Wisner has gone off his rocker, columnist Joseph Alsop wrote U.S. Ambassador Charles Chip Bolin, a seasoned American diplomat and a close Wisner friend who was at the time posted in the Philippines. It had not always been apparent that Wisner was mentally ill. In the 9 months before he checked into a mental hospital, he had often appeared normal at top-level intelligence meetings. He had testified before Congress on communist penetration in Latin America. He had sent Vice President Richard Nixon speeches by East Bloc leaders, and he had talked a young CIA officer into not quitting the agency. Solidly built, a handsome man at 49, he seemed the last person friends expected to become unhinged. And Wisner's illness was a roller coaster. At times Wisner, in fact, was sane. At other times he was falling apart, but putting up a good facade. But episodes of erratic behavior began to pile up. During a visit back to Washington in June, Bolin found Wisner very tense and wound up, he told Joe Alsop. Polly agreed. The drinking in the evening became a problem. Friends noticed he had a strange physical tic. He would flex his arm muscles, then his jaw muscles. Children who visited began asking their parents what the matter was with Mr. Wisner, who seemed frenzied. He became verbose, even sending Elizabeth a 700-word telegram describing a dove shoot he planned to have. He did not seem to friends to be using his tremendously large vocabulary with the facility and diversity he had once had. His words became imprecise. Yet in moments of anxiety or anger, which occurred more often now, Wisner's words flowed with machine-gun rapidity. He quarreled with Polly, who locked up the liquor cabinet at their Georgetown home. He told off-putting stories, and he had heated arguments at Washington dinner parties. Billy Marone, his secretary at work, discovered stacked up on his desk his uncashed paychecks, which the CIA finance office always delivered to him in a sealed envelope with his name on the front. And there was the nervous breakdown he had suffered nearly 2 years earlier, when Soviet tanks crushed a popular revolt in Hungary. In March, Wisner had flown to Singapore to be on scene for what he thought would be a successful CIA operation to oust Sukarno, the strongman of nearby Indonesia, which has more than 17,000 islands stretched over an archipelago longer than the distance between New York and Los Angeles. The CIA paid for Polly to accompany her husband on the 5-week trip, which would take him to a half-dozen Southeast Asian countries. The agency likely hoped that she would keep him in check if he had any flare-ups. Sukarno had run afoul of the Eisenhower administration, which considered him too neutral and communist-leaning for America's Cold War with the Russians. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and other top U.S. officials also did not like Sukarno, who by then had been married 5 times. "I think it's time we held Sukarno's feet to the fire," Wisner had declared, but the highly secret operation, codenamed Hake, failed. The rebellious colonels and the psychological warfare the CIA counted on to oust Sukarno sputtered. The Indonesian strongman proved to be more adept and tenacious at holding on to power than the CIA had anticipated. Director Alan Dulles shut down the operation, which had cost the agency $10 million. As the coup attempt unraveled, Wisner did too. At a stopover in Manila to see Bolin, he was utterly depressed, convinced America was losing the Cold War. Greeting him at Washington's airport, Fitzgerald found Wisner confrontational and disconnected from reality. Exhausted, the spy master took 5 days off at his Locust Hill farm in Maryland.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?